I heard my wife say another man's name in bed, and that was the moment I knew something in my life had already started to break. It was late, somewhere past midnight. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows, steady and light, the kind of sound that usually made the house feel sealed off from the rest of the world. Emma was lying beside me under the covers, warm and familiar, the same way she had been for years. We had gone through an ordinary day, client calls, a cabinet delay on a kitchen install, dinner half finished because we were both tired. Nothing about that night had announced itself as important. That was what made it worse. I was on my side, facing the dark, just starting to drift when she shifted closer and whispered a name. Lucas. Not Daniel. Not even close. My eyes opened immediately, but I didn't move. For a second, I honestly thought I might have imagined it, that maybe the rain had bent the sound into something it wasn't. But deep down I knew exactly what I had heard. There are certain moments your mind doesn't need to interpret. It just recognizes them. I turned my head slightly and looked at her outline in the dark. She didn't pull back, didn't tense, didn't correct herself. If she realized what she had said, she gave no sign of it. Her breathing stayed even. One hand rested against my chest like it belonged there, like nothing had slipped loose between us. I lay there frozen, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows from the street lamp moved across the paint. My name is Daniel. My wife had just said Lucas in our bed, in the quietest hour of the night, with rain at the windows and 12 years of marriage all around us. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't sit up, didn't turn on a light, didn't start a fight I wasn't ready to have. But the silence in that room changed. I felt it happen in real time. Something invisible had shifted position, and once it did, I knew it would never go back where it had been. That was the moment everything started. Until that night, our life looked stable from the outside. Not perfect, but steady in the quiet way that long marriages sometimes become. Emma and I had been married for 12 years. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Columbus where the houses were close enough to know your neighbors, but far enough apart to keep your privacy. It was the kind of neighborhood where people watered their lawns on Saturday mornings and waved from the driveway. Our routine had settled into something predictable over the years. I owned a kitchen renovation and design company that I had started not long after our third anniversary. At first, it was just me, a pickup truck, and a few contractors I trusted. Over time, the projects got larger. Word spread. Eventually, we had a small office, a showroom, and a steady stream of clients looking to tear out outdated kitchens and build something new. Emma joined the business about 6 years in. She had always had an eye for design. Colors, lighting, materials. She could see how a room should feel before it existed. Clients liked her immediately. While I handled the construction schedules, subcontractors, and budgets, she worked with homeowners on the creative side. Cabinets, tile patterns, fixtures, finishes. Together the system worked. People often joke that they were getting a renovation team and a married couple at the same time. We spent almost every day together. Mornings usually started the same way. Coffee at the kitchen island while checking the schedule. Then we drove to the office, sometimes talking about projects, sometimes just listening to the radio in comfortable silence. In the evenings, we would come home tired, but there was always a quiet sense that we were building something together. We even had a running joke. Our marriage runs on coffee, blueprints, and deadlines. Emma used to say when clients asked how we managed to work together without driving each other crazy. Looking back now, I realized the changes had probably started months before that night. At the time, though, they barely registered. Emma began coming home later than usual from what she described as client consultations. Sometimes she said homeowners wanted to meet after dinner because of their work schedules. That didn't seem unreasonable. Renovation clients have complicated lives. She also started keeping her phone a little closer than before. Not in an obvious way, just small habits. Setting it face down on the table during dinner. Taking it with her when she stepped into another room. Occasionally smiling at a message and then locking the screen quickly. None of it felt important enough to question. At least not then. Because before the night she whispered that name, all those things still lived in the category of normal life. Small details that passed through a day without stopping long enough to mean anything. Only later did they start to rearrange themselves into something else. After that night, the small things stopped feeling small. I didn't confront Emma about what she had said. Not the next morning, not that week, not even later when we were sitting across from each other at dinner like we had done thousands of times before. On the surface, Life continued exactly as it had. We woke up, made coffee, drove to the office, and talked with clients about cabinet finishes and countertop samples. But something inside my mind had quietly repositioned itself. Before that night, I moved through our days with a kind of automatic trust. If Emma said she had a meeting, I assumed that's where she had been. If she came home late, I believed the explanation that followed. 12 years of marriage builds that kind of rhythm. You stop questioning the details because the larger picture feels secure. Now the details were all I could see. I started listening more carefully when she spoke. Not just to the words themselves, but to the spaces around them. The pauses, the tone, the way explanations sometimes arrived before I had even asked a question. One afternoon at the office, she mentioned she might have to meet a new client later that evening. She said it casually while flipping through a tile catalog. Couple in Westerville, she said. They both work late. I nodded, the way I always had. But this time I noticed she didn't mention their names. Usually she would. Emma had a habit of remembering every client we worked with. First names, house layouts, even the color of their cabinets. It was something she was proud of. That day the details stayed vague. Another evening we were eating takeout at the kitchen counter when her phone lit up beside her plate. She glanced at the screen quickly and turned the phone over before picking up her fork again. It was a small motion. So small that a month earlier I might not have registered it at all. Now it lingered. The strange thing was that I didn't feel angry yet. Not in the explosive way people imagine when they hear stories about betrayal. Instead, I felt something quieter, something closer to awareness. Like standing in a room where a faint smell of smoke has appeared, and you're not sure yet where it's coming from. I began noticing patterns in places that had once looked ordinary. The way she sometimes stepped outside to take calls. The way certain evenings suddenly filled with last-minute appointments. The way her phone stayed within reach almost constantly. Individually, none of it proved anything. But together, slowly, the pieces began arranging themselves into a shape I couldn't ignore. The morning I realized something inside me had changed didn't feel dramatic. There was no argument, no sudden discovery, no moment that would look important from the outside. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday while I was standing at the kitchen sink waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. Emma was upstairs getting ready for work. I could hear drawers opening and closing, the soft rhythm of her morning routine moving through the house. For years that sound had been part of the background of my life. Familiar, predictable. But that morning I noticed something different in myself. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Up until then, part of my mind had still been trying to smooth things over. It kept searching for explanations that would return everything to normal. Maybe I had misheard the name that night. Maybe the late meetings were real. Maybe the phone habits meant nothing at all. That quiet effort had been running constantly beneath the surface, trying to protect the picture of our marriage that had existed for 12 years. Standing there with the coffee machine humming behind me, I realized that effort had stopped. The strange thing was that I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel panic either. What settled in instead was a kind of calm I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but clarity. I poured the coffee and leaned against the counter, thinking about the past few weeks. The late evenings. The vague client meetings. The phone turning face down on the table. And of course, the name in the dark that had started all of it. For the first time, I stopped trying to rearrange those details into something harmless. I simply allowed them to exist as they were. Emma came downstairs a few minutes later wearing a gray sweater she often wore to the office. She kissed my cheek, poured her own coffee, and began talking about a cabinet supplier who had delayed an order for one of our projects. I listened and nodded where it made sense. On the surface, nothing between us had changed. We still drove to the office together. We still talked about work schedules and client requests. If someone had watched us that morning, they would have seen a married couple starting another normal day. But internally, a different decision had already been made. I wasn't going to ask questions designed to reassure me. I wasn't going to push conversations toward explanations that might or might not be true. Instead, I decided something much simpler. I would watch. Not with anger. Not with confrontation. Just attention. Because by that point, something important had already become clear to me. If there was nothing happening, the truth would eventually show itself. And if there was something happening, the truth would show itself then too. Either way, I no longer felt the need to protect a version of reality that might already be gone. Once I made the decision to stop asking questions, observing became easier than I expected. There is a difference between living inside a routine and quietly stepping back from it. For years, Emma and I had moved through our days as a team. Our schedules overlapped. Our conversations flowed automatically, and most of our decisions were shared without much thought. Now I watched the same routines from a small distance. At the office, nothing seemed unusual at first. Clients still came through the showroom, studying cabinet doors and running their hands across quartz samples. Emma still sat with them at the design table, sketching ideas and suggesting lighting options. If anyone had asked, they would have said our business was running exactly the way it always had. But outside those meetings, the details began to shift. Emma started driving home separately more often. For years, we had left the office together at the end of the day, usually within a few minutes of each other. Sometimes we stopped for groceries on the way home. Sometimes we argued lightly about which contractor had delayed a project that week. Now she often said she needed to stay a little longer. Just finishing some drawings, she would say. Or sometimes, quick meeting with a client. I never objected. I simply nodded and told her I'd see her at home. Weekends started changing too. Our renovation business didn't usually require Saturday appointments unless a client's schedule was complicated. Lately, though, Emma seemed to have more of those meetings than before. Short ones, she said. Just an hour to go over design ideas or measure something. Occasionally, she returned later than she originally planned. When that happened, she always had an explanation ready. Traffic. A homeowner who talked longer than expected. A last-minute change to a project. I listened without interrupting. The strange thing was that I no longer felt the urge to challenge those explanations. I didn't need to. My role had shifted quietly into something else. I wasn't trying to confirm a story anymore. I was simply noticing the pattern. Eventually, I realized that observation alone would only take me so far. Patterns can suggest things, but they rarely provide clear answers. So one afternoon, after finishing a meeting with a contractor, I sat alone in my office and made a phone call. The man I spoke with was a private investigator recommended by a business attorney I trusted. His voice was calm, almost bored, the way someone sounds after many years of doing the same job. I explained the situation briefly. He didn't ask many questions, just the basic details, names, schedules, the kind of information someone uses to begin looking. When the call ended, I placed the phone back on my desk and sat there for a moment. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I wasn't even doing it for confrontation. I just wanted to know what was real. Hiring the investigator was the first step that made the situation feel larger than just a problem between Emma and me. Until then, everything had existed inside the quiet boundaries of our marriage. Suspicion, observation, small shifts in behavior. Those were personal things. Private things. But Emma and I didn't only share a home. We shared a company that supported several employees, contractors, and a long list of clients who trusted us to finish their kitchens on time. If something serious was happening, it would affect more than just the two of us. That realization changed the way I approached the situation. The investigator began his work quietly. I provided Emma's usual schedule, the office location, and a few of the neighborhoods where our clients typically lived. After that, there was very little for me to do except wait. Weeks passed with almost no updates. Every few days, he would send a short message or leave a voicemail. Most of the reports were simple. Emma had left the office, driven to a grocery store, met with a homeowner, or returned home at the usual time. The notes were factual and unemotional, like entries in a logbook. At first, I wondered if maybe I had been wrong. It wouldn't have been the worst outcome. Being wrong would have meant that the name I heard that night was nothing more than a strange mistake. An exhausted moment in the dark that my mind had interpreted incorrectly. But I didn't cancel the investigation. Instead, I continued living our routine exactly as before. Emma and I still worked side by side during the day. We still discussed project timelines and supplier delays. Occasionally, we still laughed about the same small frustrations that come with renovation work. If she sensed anything had changed in me, she never mentioned it. About 3 weeks after the investigator started following her schedule, I made a decision that created an opportunity. One evening at dinner, I mentioned that I had registered for a construction and remodeling expo in Chicago. Events like that weren't unusual in our industry. Vendors showcased new appliances, cabinet systems, and materials. Contractors attended to see what trends were coming next. I'll probably be gone most of the weekend, I told her. Leave Friday morning, come back Sunday. Emma nodded without much reaction. That makes sense, she said. You've been talking about that show for months. In reality, I hadn't mentioned it before that moment, but she didn't question it. The investigator called me the following afternoon. His tone had changed slightly, still calm, but more focused than before. Your trip to Chicago, he said. When exactly are you leaving? Friday morning, I replied. There was a short pause on the line. That should work, he said quietly. I returned from Chicago late Sunday afternoon. The drive back had been quiet. Long stretches of highway, gray sky above the road. The kind of travel that gives a man too much time to think without actually reaching any new conclusions. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I already knew the investigator had found something. He had called me early that morning with a simple message. We should talk when you get back. Emma was in the kitchen when I walked inside. The house smelled faintly of takeout food and coffee that had been reheated too many times. She looked up from the counter and smiled in the casual way people do after a normal weekend apart. How was Chicago? She asked. Busy, I said, setting my bag near the door. She poured herself another cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Her hair was tied back loosely, the way she wore it when she planned to spend the evening relaxing. I stayed home most of the weekend, she said. Watched a few shows. Ordered too much food. Her voice was calm. Nothing about her tone suggested hesitation. I nodded once and walked to the dining table. My jacket was still draped over my arm. Inside the pocket was a large envelope the investigator had handed me that morning at a small cafe near the highway. I placed the envelope on the table. Emma continued talking for another few seconds, describing a show she had started watching. Then she noticed that I hadn't responded. Her eyes shifted toward the envelope. What's that? She asked. Just something you should probably see, I said. I slid it across the table toward her. She opened it slowly. Inside were several printed photographs, the kind taken with a long lens from across a street. In the first image, she stood on the sidewalk outside an older brick apartment building downtown. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Next to her stood a man. Lucas. I recognized him immediately. He used to work as a barista at a small coffee shop near our office. Emma had spoken with him often when we stopped there between client meetings. In the next photographs, the two of them walked toward the building entranced together. Another showed them disappearing through the front door sometime after 10 at night. The final pictures were taken early the next morning. They were standing outside again. The sky was pale with sunrise. Before they went their separate ways, Lucas leaned forward and kissed her. Emma sat very still as she looked through the photos. She didn't rush. She didn't deny anything. For a long time, she simply turned each page quietly while the house remained completely silent around us. Emma finished looking at the photographs and placed them back inside the envelope with slow, careful movements. She didn't push the envelope away or try to hand it back to me. It simply stayed there on the table between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a car passed down the street, tires humming softly against wet pavement left over from the morning rain. The sound faded quickly, leaving the house quiet again. Emma rested her hands on the edge of the table and stared down at the envelope. How long? She asked after a while. Her voice was low, almost neutral. About 3 weeks, I said. She nodded once, absorbing that information the same way someone accepts a simple fact. There was no anger in her expression, no attempt to argue about the photos or question where they had come from. In a strange way, the conversation felt smaller than the weeks that had led to it. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us tried to revisit the past or explain how things had reached this point. The photographs had already done the work that words usually try to do. Emma sat back in her chair and folded her arms. I guess you already know, then, she said. I know what the pictures show. That was enough. The following weeks moved forward with a kind of quiet momentum that didn't require much direction from either of us. Once something like that becomes visible, it doesn't return to hiding. The practical side of life begins to take over. Lawyers became involved first, not through arguments, but through paperwork, documents outlining assets, business records, property values. Emma and I had built several things together over 12 years. Our house, the company, the reputation of our work in the city. All of that now had to be examined piece by piece. Most of our conversations during that time happened in conference rooms instead of our kitchen. Attorneys reviewed financial statements from the business. They studied contracts, tax filings, and the growth of the company since the day it started. Because Emma had worked alongside me for years, her role had to be considered carefully. The process was methodical. There were no dramatic confrontations, no late-night arguments in the house. By that point, the energy required for those kinds of battles had already faded. Instead, everything moved through structured conversations and signed documents. When people imagine the end of a marriage, they often picture explosive moments. Doors closing, voices rising, accusations filling the air. Our ending looked different. It unfolded quietly, through legal language, schedules, and decisions made across polished tables while attorneys took notes. The truth had already been established. After that, the rest was simply the process of separating two lives that had once been built together. The court's decision arrived several months later. By then, most of the difficult conversations had already happened. Lawyers had reviewed the company finances, the property records, and the years Emma had spent working as the design lead in our business. Everything that had once existed as shared effort now had to be translated into numbers and percentages. The final ruling itself was straightforward. Emma received a financial settlement based on the company's growth during the years she had been involved in it. The valuation process had taken weeks, accountants reviewing contracts, project histories, and revenue records. In the end, the court determined that she was entitled to a portion of the company's increased value. I kept the business. I also kept the house. Neither of us argued much when the decision was finalized. By that stage, the legal process had already reduced the situation to something clear and structured. The documents were signed, filed, and recorded. But there was one decision the court didn't make. That one was mine. Emma had technically remained part of the company during the legal process. For practical reasons, the attorneys had advised that we keep the structure unchanged until the settlement was finalized. On paper, she still held the position of lead interior designer. Once the paperwork was complete, that arrangement no longer made sense. The following Monday morning, the office opened the same way it always did. The showroom lights turned on, contractors arrived to review schedules, and a delivery truck backed up to the loading area with a shipment of cabinet panels. Emma came in a few minutes after 9. She walked through the front door carrying her bag and paused slightly when she saw me standing near the design table. The room felt unusually quiet, even though nothing about the building itself had changed. "I need to speak with you for a moment," I said. We stepped into my office and closed the door. The conversation was short, calm, direct. I explained that with the legal settlement completed, the company would be moving forward under my sole ownership. Because of that, her role within the business would officially end at the close of the week. Emma listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly, as if she had expected the outcome long before the words were spoken. About an hour later, she stood in the main office area, holding a small cardboard box with her things. A few design samples, some notebooks, a framed photo from an old company event. She looked around the room for a long moment. I didn't say anything else. Time moved forward the way it always does, quietly and without asking permission. The company continued growing. New clients came through the showroom, bringing floor plans and renovation ideas. Contractors moved in and out of the office discussing timelines, measurements, and delivery schedules. Projects started, projects finished, and new ones replaced them. From the outside, nothing about the business looked different. But my life had become noticeably simpler. The house was quieter in the evenings. I spent more time reviewing plans at the kitchen table or walking through job sites without worrying about rushing back to match someone else's schedule. There was a steadiness in my days that hadn't existed for a long time. Every once in a while, though, my mind drifts back to that night. The rain on the windows. The dark room. The moment Emma whispered a name that wasn't mine. That was when everything changed. And, in a way, the moment when everything had already ended. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.